Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Harry Sharp has made his way from the Brisbane Lions all the way south of the border, and he is a Melbourne Demon in 2025. Does this move have significant impacts and implications for the Melbourne Footy Club? For the Lions, it's a couple of losses out the door for them. Maybe some others are a little bit more significant than this one, but how big of an impact could the loss of Harry be? Well, from a fantasy footy perspective, in AFL Fantasy, SuperCoach, Dream Team and Keeper, is there some value here in this move with Harry Sharp now being at Melbourne? We'll talk about all that and more on this episode. It's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I do hope you're well, and I trust you've been enjoying this series so far as we've looked at every single player movement from the 2024 free agency and trade period. Harry's a little bit of an unknown player to a lot of people in the footballing landscape. He's played enough football to have had a chance at the AFL level, not crazy amounts, but 6 games this year, half of them sub-affected, with the green, of course, so 3 full games in there. But there are some really nice skill sets that Harry has. You haven't just had to watch him at VFL level or under 18s level to see that this guy's got some elite running traits. Runs all day. Could probably sit alongside the likes of a Langdon, a Goulden and a Bailey Smith prior to his ACL, of being that type of player that it wouldn't shock me that he's got the capacity and ability to stay on the field for 100% game time if it was required from him. So he's got athleticism and high-end aerobic capacity. To go with that high-end athletic tank is he's got a really nice turn of pace about him as well. Sometimes if you've got that high-end athletic and aerobic ability, you don't have high-end speed, but Harry's got both of them, and he's also pretty sharp with his skills. Elite is probably too kind of a word, but he's far from a butcher. If he wants to hit a target, he more often than not does. And so he's a very, very handy wingman and very, very handy outside player. And unfortunately for him at Brisbane, and maybe we should talk about the impact for him, is there's just been really little to no space for him to find his feet. Jasper Fletcher has burst onto the scene of the better part of the past 2 years. Then you've had guys like McKenna and Wilmot. While they're not wingmen, they push high up the ground as run and carry styles of players. Then you've got a McCluggage type who's an in and outside player. Then the highly regarded father-son selection in Ashcroft. You've got Marshall coming through as the academy pick. This midfield is deep for days. Jared Berry's spending a lot of time across the wings at the moment, and not as much through the inside mid. So unfortunately here for Harry, there's just not been any space and opportunity for him to get consistent game time at the AFL level. And it's understandable why he's taken this opportunity that Melbourne has given him by saying, hey, there's a spot for you in our team. We think you could fill it. For Brisbane, it's not really a loss of depth. As I've mentioned, they're about to get arguably the best kid in this year's draft in their team. And Marshall's not exactly a slouch either, arguably another first-round pick. So for Brisbane, politely, this has no impact on their team whatsoever. From a Melbourne perspective, this gets really interesting to me. I feel like their wings, in principle, are pretty locked, with Langdon on one and Windsor on the other. But probably the greatest knock on Melbourne has been that they very quickly over the last 12 months lost some significant depth in that midfield. And that got exposed a lot this year with an underdone Clayton Oliver, injury significantly, big injury, significantly ended and injured the season for Christian Petrarca. And then Angus Brayshaw with a forced retirement due to concussion. Like very, very quickly, that midfield depth thinned out. And so I'm not suggesting for any means that Harry is coming into this inside midfield mix. Rather, I'm suggesting This is the pathway of Harry getting a best 22 opportunity. Last year, the club were thrilled to secure at the Melbourne Footy Club Caleb Windsor. I thought of any pure wingman in their first year, it was as good as anyone's I've seen, to be honest. Has great running patterns, impacting the scoreboard, plenty of transition scoring in fantasy footy, and looked like he's not just a one-dimensional, uncontested mark, run and carry, and possession player. There's some traits about Caleb's game that I would not be surprised at all if Melbourne have thought, geez, we'd love to get him on the inside of the contest a little bit here too. We'd love to add a little bit more burst and dynamic of speed through the clearances. And Caleb does feel like the kind of player to me that I feel like he could.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Almost like a Hugh McCluggage type, transitioned himself very, very easily from being just a pure wingman and an uncontested outside style of player to moving inside the contest and proving to be just as efficient, if not arguably more. And so if that's the case, if Windsor's moving on the inside, well, now there is a wing spot that has opened up. And now all of a sudden there is a pathway for Harry to be in the best 22, best 23. Now, how likely is that? Well, I'm not certain that it's high, but I think it's a consideration that Melbourne would certainly have looked at. And the activation of this trade at least enables them to consider it. At the very least for Harry, he's now just one injury or suspension away from getting one of those wing spots, let alone if a hunch that I have around Windsor moving more inside ends up happening or not. So the move for Harry is it gives him the best opportunity to get best 22, best 23 AFL football in 2025 and beyond. What does it mean for us in fantasy footy? Well, 3 of his 6 games were sub-affected. So it's a high 30s average in fantasy, and SuperCoach rather, and a mid-40s average in AFL Fantasy, a top score of 87 in that format. Just missed the 80 marker in SuperCoach. There are some tons in the VFL across the format, so he can score okay. Wingman's scoring is a little bit roller coastery, to say the least. Just think of a namesake this year in the fantasy footy community in Jeremy Sharp. There were games where he was popping 110s, 120s, and then there were other games where he was popping 30s, 40s, and 50s. And that's just the nature of if you're stuck on a wing and the game is running more through either through the corridor or on an opposing wing and flank to you, you're doing all the work, but the ball just doesn't come near you. If he's on a wing, both of those things I could see as possible, and he'll be a little bit of a more expensive cash cow than I think many would be wanting to spend money on. Therefore, in Classic, he's probably just outside of the cash cow range and more in a breakout candidate, which probably puts him a little bit out of contention and consideration. But if he does lock in a wing spot, and it will only be with the likes of a Caleb Windsor moving inside, then at least I'm interested in Harry as a fantasy prospect. If he's just depth, I've just got no interest whatsoever at all. He needs to be locked into that best 22 because other moves have happened for me to be even vaguely considering him. He can score okay, but as I mentioned, wings and flanks and outside players just feel a little up and down. Unlike a Caleb Windsor, I don't see a pathway for Harry moving on the inside just yet. That could happen and it could bloom at Melbourne, but there's nothing I've seen at Brisbane in the VFL or even in his junior days that would tell me that Harry's got the inside skill set that I think could transition right now for Melbourne. Windsor is a much closer pick in my eyes, let alone anybody else they might want to bring into that midfield mix to add further depth. So Harry Sharp for me. Look, if all the variables hit his way, there is a world where he is the Sharp of 2024, but in 2025, that could be really relevant for us. There's also a world where you're just not even considering him at all. To me, everything hinges on Caleb Windsor's move off the wing. If that happens, I'm interested. It doesn't mean I'm committed to it, but I'm at least interested. Without that, I've just got no interest, not only in Classic nor in draft. If he's not best 22, best 23 then there's just no interest. Has he been promised the move of consistent AFL football and there's a spot for you to lose? Well, it's going to require a Langdon or Windsor off the wing for that to happen. Or is it more likely to be he's a step or two closer in the pecking order to getting consistent AFL football? It's probably more the latter, but at least there's a pathway to consistent AFL football for Harry Sharp at Melbourne. Do you agree or disagree with my take? Not only about his fantasy relevance for 2025, but the pathway of how he could find his way into the starting squad at Melbourne. If you like this video and you're watching it on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel and give this video a like and comment below and let me know if you agree with how Harry could get into this best Melbourne side. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, do make sure you give us a 5-star rating and jump into the description of this episode. It's there. You can join in the conversation across social media. All our handles are there for Instagram, TikTok, X, and Facebook. Just click the link, get involved. The community is already jumping in with their take on what it means from a fantasy footy perspective. And then, of course, our Patreons are getting plenty of great content that is hidden behind the paywall, our keeper ranks, and much more right throughout the off-season. If you're not part of our Patreon yet, the good news is it's not too late. You can jump on board that and get yourself some of the brand new Coaches Panel merch. All the links for those things, the Patreon, the merch, social media, and more in the description of this episode. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in as we're giving you my thoughts on Harry Sharp. We can't wait to be back with you again real soon, talking about another player that's moved clubs this trade and free agency period.